The TT's been going for over 100 years. 2011 is the centenary of the TT on the mountain course, but the TT actually started in 1907. And there have been many great riders, including, especially, John Surtees. John Surtees is the son of Jack Surtees, who used to race sidecars, Norton sidecar, and John Surtees was his passenger for quite a long time until he started riding solos. I actually raced against John Surtees at Brands Hatch in the immediate post-war years. All that I ever saw of him was his leather-clad backside disappearing into the distance, but I can proudly say that I have raced against John Surtees. But he went on, of course, to greatness. Another quiet man. John never makes a fuss about anything. He has a very strong personality, but he's a self-taught engineer, and he bought bikes and was so good on a single-cylinder Norton in short-circuit races and the TT that Norton were more or less obliged to have him as a works rider, which they did for a very short time. But then he was so good that MV, with their distinctive four-cylinder bikes, which were, I won't say replicas of the four-cylinder Gileras, but very much like them, recruited John Surtees to become a works rider. And he had a very long and enormously successful racing career, not just in the Isle of Man, but on all the continental circuits as well, until, having been there and done that and won that, whatever it was and wherever it was, he decided to transfer his attention to four-wheel racing with great success, to become the only ever in the history of motorsport world champion on both two wheels and four wheels, and a very nice man. Now, I've talked about the continental manufacturers pulling out in '57, but something very significant had happened 3 years earlier in 1954, because a deputation of Japanese people came over to the Isle of Man to have a look at the races, and it was headed by a chap called Mr. Soichiro Honda. Now, we had never heard of Honda, but they came over, and Mr. Honda, who had built up a substantial business in Japan, declared his intention of coming back in 1955 to take part in the TT races with Japanese Honda machines and riders. He subsequently discovered he'd bitten off more than he could chew, and they didn't actually come back until 1959, when, to the utter amazement of everybody who was following the TT and who had expected the Hondas to be copies of successful racing machines like Norton, Honda came over to compete in the 125 class with twin-cylinder, four-valve, overhead camshaft, spring frame, telescopic fork bikes. They didn't win the race to complete the boys' own paper story, but they won the team prize. And then the next year, they came back with four-cylinder 250s, and frankly, we haven't seen them since. I don't mean they disappeared, I mean that they've just won everything to become Honda, one of the greatest names in the history of motorcycle racing in general, and the TT in particular. And they were followed by Suzuki and Yamaha, and 2011 is seeing the 50th anniversary of Yamaha over here, and 2010 was the 50th anniversary of Suzuki, and Honda have been going even longer. And so from the time that Honda came, we started to get a revival of the TT, which had been not what it used to be, to put it bluntly. And we had year after year of the most exciting and dramatic racing as Honda, Suzuki and Yamaha all tried to outdo each other. Suzuki and Yamahas with two-stroke machines, and Hondas with four-stroke machines. And because the only way you can get more power out of a four-stroke machine is to have more cylinders, Honda were having more and more cylinders. So they had 356-cylinder machines, 254-cylinder machines, 500cc four-cylinder machines. And this was when you got to the era of Mike Harewood, Giacomo Agostini, Phil Reed, Bill Ivey, and the racing at the TT was just as dramatic and just as exciting as it had ever been. I have to single out at some point or another my favourites and the people I regard as the all-time greatest. In TT terms, the 1967 Senior TT was the most exciting motorsport event of any kind that I have ever seen, because you had two fantastic personalities in Giacomo Agostini from Italy and Englishman Mike Harewood competing against each other. And they were fantastic personalities, not just because they were brilliant riders, but because they were outstanding people. Giacomo Agostini, dark-haired, enormously handsome, gigantically personable, wonderfully eloquent, exciting. The women absolutely loved him and followed him in droves, and he was a brilliant rider and the son of a millionaire. The contrast was Mike Harewood, my great friend Mike Harewood, son of a millionaire, Stan Harewood, who had built up an enormous empire of motorcycle dealerships and realised how good Mike was in his early days and literally poured money into developing his talent. And Mike was the greatest motorcycle racer of all time, in my opinion, with, I have to reluctantly say now, the possible exception of Valentino Rossi. But Mike was the opposite of Giacomo Agostini in terms of personality. He was very quiet, very dry sense of humour, the most enormous fun, and if the girls loved Agostini, they loved Mike Harewood even more. And the amazing thing was they were the best of friends. They were rivals on the circuit, but they were great friends afterwards. And the 1967 TT saw Mike Harewood on a four-cylinder Honda, which did not handle at all well, against Giacomo Agostini on a three-cylinder MV, which ironically Mike Harewood had developed when he was an MV works rider. And Agostini was one of the very few continental people who really conquered the mountain circuit. So in 1967 you had these two truly great world champions, TT winners, on the two top bikes of the day, four-cylinder Honda and the three-cylinder MV, friends racing against each other, and was it an exciting race. First of all, Agostini led, then Mike Harewood led. 7-lap race in those days, don't forget. And halfway through the race, they came in to refuel. And Mike Harewood, I mean, this is a mark of the man. Mike Harewood actually had a loose twist grip. And the twist grip is the thing that you control the power of the bike with. It's the accelerator. And Mike screamed for a hammer. And they threw him one from them, and he started hammering at the end of his handlebar, which would have done absolutely no good at all. But anyway, he got away, and the last lap was absolutely sensational. And sadly, there was an anticlimax because Agostini's chain broke, and he actually coasted home, and Mike won this wonderful, wonderful race. Needless to say, I interviewed Mike after the race, and he never showed any emotion. He never threw his hands up in the air and said, "Oh, I won," or had his face burst into. He just said, he just told me he felt absolutely knackered. I've talked about great TT riders. I haven't had said very much about Phil Reed, of course, who was another truly great TT rider, particularly in his years with Yamaha. And who won the TT and became world champion. But we never ever thought that Mike Harewood's record which had beaten that of Stanley Woods. 10 TT races for Stanley would be beaten. But it subsequently was, because we got into another new era altogether with no works machines in the way of World Championship bikes, because the TT became a different sort of event altogether. In effect, and I'm using the words very carefully, a superbike event, more like road machines than pure racing machines. And it was in that era that you got the greatest TT rider of all time in terms of number of successes. And that's the brilliant Irishman Joey Dunlop, who won 26 times. Now it's very easy for me to say now, I can't imagine that Joey Dunlop's record of 26 times will ever be beaten. But Stanley Woods' record was beaten, Hale Wood's record was beaten. Maybe Joey Dunlop's record will be beaten. Maybe, conceivably, by John McGuinness. Ian Hutchison in 2010 did something that I would never in my wildest dreams have imagined could have happened. He won every one of the 5 major races that he rode in one TT meeting. And there are names like Carl Fogarty and Steve Hislop, great TT riders. And the Fogarty-Hislop race is one of the greatest of all time in TT history, when Steve Hislop won on the Wankel-engined Norton, and that was the last Norton victory at the TT. The TT hasn't always been just about solo bikes, though. In the early days, sidecars were very much part of a TT week. And 2 names in particular that come up are Freddie Dixon, who had a unique banking sidecar. His passenger had a lever on the left-hand side of the sidecar, and when they were going, I must get it right, I think when they were going around left-hand bends, he pushed it forwards, and so the sidecar went down a bit, and when they were going around right-hand bends, he pulled the lever back, and the sidecar went up a bit, and it helped the cornering speed. Freddie Dixon was a gigantically talented engineer who won the TT in sidecars and my dad was one of the top motorcycle sidecar riders in the TT and was finished second in 1923 on a Norton. But then the TT lapsed until after the war, when it came back again on a different course, actually, on what they call the Clips course, which was a very much shorter version and it didn't take in the mountain. And that was where the great Eric Oliver not only won the TT, but became multiple world champion, riding a Norton. But then the same thing happened with sidecars as had happened with solos. Nortons, frankly, just weren't good enough. But it wasn't Italian machines that then dominated the sidecar class after Norton petered out, comparatively speaking. It was the German BMW. And for years and years, people like Max Deubel were top TT sidecar riders and world champions. And we had some truly stirring racing. Chris Vincent, actually, the British rider, won on a BSA-powered outfit on the Clips course, just as in the post-works time with solos, Joey Dunlop became the top man. There's an equivalent in the sidecar class, and that's Dave Molyneux, who is a local man. He lives in the Isle of Man, and he builds racing machines for people, and he builds extremely quick racing machines for himself, sidecar outfits. And off the top of my head, I can't remember how many sidecar TTs he's won, but I think it's 14, an amazing achievement. Whilst the TT had a period when it looked as though, frankly, it was going beneath the waves for the 3rd time, it has been brilliantly revived, and the attendances are now just as big as they used to be, if not bigger, and the racing is just as exciting as it used to be. So the TT over the years has not only established itself, as I said earlier on, as the greatest motorsport event in the world, but has nurtured and developed truly great personalities and enabled us to watch with admiration and respect some of the greatest racing of all time.